Hello, so today is the first video of technique incorporation and just sort of a technique overview of things that I am not expert in, but have learned enough to do. Because cosplayers are going to be not experts in many things, but they know what they're doing with a lot of these things. So yeah, today's technique is the one that I am known for. I'm known for beading. Beading is my big thing. Everyone knows me for my giant beading pieces. We'll go through a whole bunch of them. I've got a bunch over there and I'll just talk about them. I've got a demonstration filmed where I just show the very basics of beading. It's very simple. With a lot of techniques like embroidery and stuff, it's not hard to do at all. It just takes you millions of years to do. But beading is a really cool thing for a lot of people, and it's really interesting what you can do with beading and embellishment, because you can do a lot of things. I find beading to be the lesser of the evils when it comes to embroidery. It's beading, couching, and then actual embroidery, because at least with beading, not only does it go a little faster, you can also do a whole bunch of really cool stuff with it, right? And I'll go through that. I've got my Anakin here, right? I think the Anakin, these pauldrons were the first things I ever beaded. Ever. These pauldrons are the first thing I ever beaded. And it's really cool to sort of realize, oh yeah, no, I've been doing this for a while, and it's a really cool thing. I'll do an embellishments video as well with like trimmings, but for now it's just how to use beads semi-effectively. I'm going to disclaim that I learned from the YouTube, so if I'm doing something that is heinous to actual beaders out there, I apologize, this is how I learned. I watched one video and said I can do that. So beading is also a way to add texture to a garment, and it's a really cool way to create designs that are very raised in 3D, and I take a lot of inspiration from Michelle Carragher, who does the Game of Thrones embroidery, who uses beads a lot in like mixtures. So instead of just doing like giant bead pieces, she also does pieces with beading and embroidery and couching and gold work, and that stuff is something that I'll talk about too, is combining techniques. Generally for beads, this was my first ever beading project, was this gigantic piece here, and there's another one on the other side, but I really wanted to, I'll get it more up close in a second, but yeah, I just really wanted to say, so when I mention beading, I mention a lot of stuff like this, right, where there's just beads everywhere. This is a technique of bead embroidery, and I'm just using lots of different ones, but yeah. So this is bead embroidery is what I call it, so it's different than beading and different than like other stuff. Yeah. It lives on a magnet. Yeah, so across Senator Anakin, there are approximately 5 pieces of bead embroidery. There's this one, there's the one on the other side, which we'll get to in just a second. So there's this one, right? So this is the other side. You'll notice that there's red and blue, all this stuff. I have a whole video on Senator Anakin and why. Then we've got little beads here. You'll notice them on the other side as well. These are diamonds. Yeah. Then there's also this is basically my giant bead project. We've got beads. This is a giant piece of beading using like gems and stuff. We've got smaller pieces here, right? And then we've also got, so basically this whole project, like all of this project is giant pieces of just beading and embroidery and embellishment. There's a lot of couching. You'll just notice a lot of like embellishment and stuff. But yeah, so there's the belt. We'll get to the bottom. Ignore the wrinkles, that's why I'm remaking this costume later, but yeah, so you'll notice the beautiful pieces here. So this is a little bit of tiny beading, and then we have here outlined embroidery pieces and beads, some beads out on embroidery pieces. We've got these giant beads that are just stitched down, yeah. And then in the mid-back, there is this gigantic piece here, right? So we've got our textural beads, big beads, small beads, bugles, which are basically plastic, and they've lost all their color now at this point, but, it still works. And you'll just notice a lot of circles, concentric circles, non-concentric, right? Just lots of tiny details and stuff. There's beads here. Again, like I said, this all around is their beads, but yeah, this is kind of the middle bit. So one of my other favorite things is using beads as singular entities and sort of beating them down and around things, because it really adds a lot of texture. Now my crowning piece of beading, the thing that I use when I show people my examples, is this cape. This cape is covered in beads, but it is not covered in beads without embroidery, if you move this, right, being underneath of the beads to give texture. But then there's just beads of all different types, textures, colors, sizes, different types of everything. And then it's not just the front or the side. I use pendants a lot, actually, to create these illusions. It's not just this part, then you go here, and then the back has this stuff, right? And this is all just sewn on via straight lines and a bunch of different, like, me trying things. Sometimes they crisscross like this, though. That gets a little funky. But yeah. Yeah, they'll crisscross. And then we go into sort of design elements. So yeah, this is where I started taking embroidery as the base and then beading over top of it, which has become something I love to do. Like, we've got lots of satin stitching here. The outsides, I've also crisscrossed things and couch things, and down here is just a really nice example of beads. There's a lot of purple, a lot of different colors. I also use these really crazy ones. Like, you can go ham. You don't have to use the small beads all the time. They're nice, but you can create textures. And then we also have, you know, wire wraps things. We've got little things. We got more things. There's just a lot on here. And this is the second side. The first side has a lot as well. So we go over to this side, right? This was the first piece I did for this project, right? So we've got all of this crazy stuff going on. And I got a little crazy with it. You'll notice to go slightly sideways. Ignore that. But yeah, we've got crazy beads plus covered up beads. Plus this whole bottom area, which just was fun. And then there's like stuff inside of this piece. And it's all in silk. So basically, beading is not super hard because this is all just stuff that I hand sewed in with straight lines. They're all done in like lines of about 5 beads, then you sew into the next one. But this took forever. Now, one thing I want to highlight on this is, I'm trying to highlight this one. This is actually a bead underneath of here, right? There's a bead underneath of this one. Then I sewed over it with embroidery floss, and then I beaded over top the embroidery floss. So now it's got a really, really nice sort of, it sticks up, which is really, really cool. So there's a lot of little stuff like that, right? If we go to the back, though, I also want to show that. So if you go to the back, you'll notice here there's just a lot of crisscrossing and using beads in fun ways, right? So it's crisscrossing over stuff. I'm using like these little quartz crystals with beads, and then you go down, you'll notice that just each one is slightly beaded in different ways, and it's really fun because it was really intricate. But yeah, so that's the leaf cape. The leaf cape is kind of my crowning achievement of beads. And the way that I finished this off, because the inside would obviously be covered in threads, is I hand lined it, right? So I used, it's actually kind of hard to get to, which is nice. I just covered it in lining. I used some cotton, and it just sits on top of that. And if anyone wants to flip my, my piece, they'll just get a lining. So no one sees any of the threads. One cool thing about beading, bring you back to the front here. Okay, one cool thing about beading is that originally this is a layer of silk and a layer of canvas, right? And with the beading, it's chunky. This thing, like, beads are heavy. This thing is probably like 5 to 10 pounds at this point. And it's really structured. So these hold their shape really well because they've got a bunch of beads, pads. I call it pad stitching, but it's like really fancy pad stitching in a way where you just like do a bunch of stitches in a specific way and it just holds its shape really nicely. Now obviously this is sewn, this is 2 curves that I sewed together to make the thing. You know how you make bra cups? I did the same thing for the shoulder pads, but still, it's really, really cool. Yeah. So those are just a couple of examples of what I do. I'm going to insert said demonstration here. Here in Beading a Thing, I thought I'd actually show you sort of materials and how I do it, and just a simple little, like, very basic tutorial. So the first thing you're gonna need are beading needles. Now this is a size 10 needle that I got from Joann's. They come in these like yellow packets. You can also get like fancy ones, but you're gonna want, so I go through a lot of these. I've rusted many of these because I've used so many beads. I get a pack of 4 like every couple of times that I, like, if I'm starting to run low on needles, if I've got like 2 left, then I'll just get another pack of 4 because I go through them so fast. Don't lose these. They like to slingshot around rooms. I have slingshotted these. This is one I found on the floor. This happens. The other thing I do is I use normal thread. So I'm using brown thread. I'm just using regular thread. You can use the fancy beading thread, but I've found that I've worn costumes that I've worn to like 10 conventions that have beads on them have worked just fine. So like just regular, I use the fancy thread. I don't use the like regular, like cheap thread. This stuff just looks a little nicer and works a little better. because your beads might shred your thread where it snips and cracks, and that's part of it. I use regular scissors. I also have, I have like 5 pairs of scissors right now. I've got my sword scissors. I have my old fabric scissors that are now my foam scissors, and my fabric scissors are on the floor. So I always have like 5 pairs of scissors and beanies. You're also like, where do you actually embroider? On my ironing board. My ironing board has also become a table. Something else, I'll talk about embroidery later. Currently, I'm using these. So these are check beads. I currently have 2 things of them. You can also get the like regular packets. I've got a whole bunch sitting on the floor right now. You can use these. These are my favorite. These are size 10s. So these are 11s actually. And then, yeah, these are all 11. So 11 is like a very small size. So you'll notice that these are pretty small. I work a lot with small beads because it adds a lot of texture, but you can also go a little bit bigger. And give me 1 second. Beads. So while we're here, these are also 11-0s. You're like, that's a lot of beads. I store them in plastic bags. So a lot of these have like storage pieces, and then I don't have a very organized way of doing this. I need to get like an actual caddy and stuff, but right now I just use an old piece of plastic, and there's beads here. And then usually they'll go into one of these plastic bags when I'm done. So, yeah, so I have a lot of these. These are all from the leaf cape, right? Okay, so we've got some that are a little bit bigger. You can't really see those. I've used most of these. These are a little bit bigger. These are about 8-0, so they are slightly bigger. And then I think somewhere I have very much bigger ones, but they're currently sitting nowhere. But I can use this as an example, right? So this is a beading piece I did. These are bigger. These are about 6-0. Yeah, so that's just kind of a very basic thing of bead sizes. And you can also get like these. So now we can get into other beads. Another type of bead are these. So these are the packets. These are like the really simple packets. I really like these because they're shiny, but these are like half bugles. They're really small, so like seed type beads, but also bugles. And then there's very long bugles. I don't actually have any on hand right now because I didn't use them for the last project, but when I embroider my sandworm, I'm going to use a lot more of them. So there's a lot of really unique ways to use beads. There's also these really fancy ones. They're really shiny, but they're kind of more expensive, and I don't find them that useful. Bugles. Yeah. These are the needles I'm talking about. So this is a package of needles, and they're size 10, so they go through the very small beads that I like to use. You can also get bigger ones. You can also use regular needles, but they won't get through the, they won't get through beads. While we're here, you can also use non-seed beads. You can also use random novelty beads, and you can use those the strung beads that are really weird and random. I'll show you an example, or I think I showed you an example when I was showing the leaf cape. There's a whole bunch of like random beads that are not shaped like anything, or like stone beads. You can use those too. I did that in the style of Michelle Carragher, meaning that I used as many random techniques as I could find, but these square beads are really pretty, and I used them for the collar, which you saw. So I'm going to do the utmost basic beading tutorial, like the literal basics. I'm not doing anything fancy here. I'm just kind of like lining pieces of thing with beads, which is very time consuming. The big thing about beads is that it's not hard. It's very time consuming. So you just have to have the patience of like, I don't know, but you have to have a lot of patience. So I learned from YouTube. So this is the way that I've done it for about 2 years. So I've been beading for a while, and it works out fine. You want 2 strands of, you want one really long piece of thread that you can thread through, and then knot at the bottom. And then this knot will go under your fabric, and then you'll take it up, and there you go. So now what comes next is you've got your beads, right? I pick them up with my needle. I took 1 class of beading in high school. Okay, so I'm not completely incompetent. You pick up a bead with your needle, and you sew it down. So you just pull it through. If you want more than 1 bead, so if you want 2 beads, what I like to do is I just pick up 2 beads. I drag them all the way down so I can see where it is, so I don't have to go too far out. I put my needle back down. And then if it's anything more than 1 bead, I will go through these 2 twice. So I'll push myself back through to the bottom here, and then I will go back through them, and that's really it. At the end, you just tie your knots. So you'll go underneath, right? Also, something that I notice a lot is if you go fast, you will knot up your thread pretty horrifically. Usually you can kind of manipulate it down. And I'm going to outro. So currently for a lot of projects, which is why I'm doing overviews of projects that I'm doing right now, is that a lot of projects are in states of almost being done in terms of like this guy and like Senator Anakin will get his new coat, but things are just in terms of just being done in their states of waiting for materials. I'm waiting for some needles to do lace fronting and ventilating for wigs, which will be a video of me learning how to do that. And I don't know anything about it. I'm just gonna figure it out as I go. So this is what you're being left with. I hope that you find the bead endeavor well. I hope that you find that maybe it makes sense. Perhaps it does not make sense, and I apologize if it does not make sense. I also learned from YouTube. If you want to learn on YouTube, you can learn from YouTube. A new crafty video is being made, but with my 50 million deadlines, it might not come out for a while, and I'll probably make a video on hand embroidery next week or couching or something. I don't know yet, but here we are. Have a wonderful, whatever cold, not cold, random snow/rain week it is next week.